All right, welcome back. This is part 2 of the wireframe rendering tutorial. Okay, so if you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch part 1 because that will sort of get you to this point in refinement of this wireframe. And what we're looking at here is just sort of the continuation of what we established in part 1. And so this is just an ambient occlusion shader attached to this helix. Now let's look at that in the hypershade for a second. I'm going to bring the hypershade over here and we'll see if we can take a look at that. You'll see it has an MIV ambient occlusion, surface shader 1, and here's the surface shader group. So those are the 3 elements that are the most important here, and just keep that in mind. And if you haven't watched part 1, go back and do that now because we're going to be getting into some options that we now have with using this wireframe in a compositing mode, either in Photoshop or After Effects. So this is really cool, and it's sort of like you know, the typical wireframe where you have lots of options. Now I've made a bunch of changes to this render, and as you can see here, that's kind of where we left off with just a simple ambient occlusion shader to both these objects. But as I go along here, you'll notice that in this version what I did is I took the took this surface shader 1 SG and actually raised up our transparency level, and then basically just raised it to, you know, fully transparent, and that's what gave me this wireframe. And you can see the occlusion still on the surface there, and you can see where the, you know, it kind of gets obscured and stuff. So anyway, you can kind of still see the occlusion, but you kind of have a wireframe as well. Well, that's just one option that you have as far as doing this. And let's say we wanted to, you know, maybe have this be a wireframe to begin with, and then just sort of appear as a solid. Well, we could animate that transparency value as well, and I'll show you how to do that, but that's just sort of what you can be aware of at the moment. Now let's take a look at some of the other versions. This, I basically just brought the transparency level back down and just did a render with changing this color. Basically on the surface shader itself, or on the ambient occlusion, you'll see where I changed it up to a dark, kind of a dark blue, using this value down here to establish color value for the shadows that come in here on the ambient occlusion. So that's another option that you have, is switching this up. And let's take another look down the line here. In this case, I just assigned a simple Lambert and sort of switched it up. I took the ambient occlusion off and just put a regular Lambert on there. And you know, this has contour rendering enabled, so that's what we got there, which is really cool because sometimes we just want to output the wireframe itself and then have anything that's in the black area sort of be a part of the alpha channel or transparent. Okay, so there it is like that. So this presents an ideal kind of image to bring in and composite in Photoshop or After Effects. And let me just show you that real quick. I'll bring up After Effects. As you can see here in After Effects, I have, you know, basically the same thing going on. I just sort of imported a bunch of different images with different wireframe colors and some different textures, and I sort of just, you know, got this kind of thing. So you can see it's basically an easy composite. These are just IFF images that I output one at a time through my render view. And you know, for a still image this works great. Obviously you're probably going to have animated stuff, so you know, this just shows you the concept of how easy it is. You know, so these are just basically IFF files that are sort of they're blended. I think all you got to do is go to your blending mode and then use it as a screen right here, and that's it. And that works the same for Photoshop as well. So I'll show you the quick process of doing that. It's pretty easy. And yeah, so there you have like a really good idea of what, you know, the options for doing different, you know, different stuff with this is. Now let's take a look at Photoshop. Let's see, Photoshop. in Photoshop, it's kind of the same thing. These are just the same IFF images, and you can see I got blue lines selected there. If I select, say, like green lines, that's what I get. And the cool thing about just doing, if you're just trying to make a really nice rendering for Photoshop that you can work with some of these levels with in your materials, it's really cool because I could, say, choose my green lines right there and just move the fill down a bit. And that kind of gives it tones it down a little bit and gives it a real cool look. So anyway, that's option, number 8. There's probably 100,000 options in doing this kind of stuff. But anyway, as you see there, these are just those IFF images in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hide Photoshop for a second. And I'm going to hide After Effects. And here's where we are in the render view. Now, these are just some simple, basic textures that I put to that helix and output them, and you saw the results of the composite. So there was some variations there. Now, this was just a straight Lambert with a, with a green. Now, when I got into this area up here, I went back to kind of where I was before with the ambient occlusion shaders, and decided, well, I want to have a real light in there. I don't want to be using just the default light as a, sort of light to throw this ambient occlusion. So I want to switch out of this ambient occlusion type mode and go to something more real, like a spotlight coming down through here. And this was my first default spotlight render as it was there. But, it looks a little ragged around the edges. This is a little dark. I mean, it just doesn't look quite right. So I went back and looked at the, let's see here. There it is. The light options for the spotlight, and these were the default depth map shadows. Okay, so I applied, standard depth map shadows. And, they're kind of hard, very hard edged. And I wasn't really after something like that. And you can see where the hard edge shows up, kind of in the geometry. So I went over and switched it out to let's see, what did I switch it out to? Switched it out to, let's see. Actually, I was working with a light radius for this shadow. And let me call up the spotlight here real quick so we can kind of see what's going on. I'll have to pull up my outliner. There we go. And on this spotlight, I moved the shadow color up a bit, and we don't see that yet, but I'm just showing you kind of what I'm using. I'm using the ray trace shadows, and I moved the light radius up to about 3. So those were my final render settings, and I'm going to show you the difference of what that did. It went from sort of something like this up to something a little softer, but it was a little bit dark because it was on black. And then by the time I raised the values up a little bit, I got kind of a nice shadow there. So anyway, that's because in this spotlight, if I go up here and check out the shadow color, this was set to black. So anyway, that was just a way of varying the shadow color, and you can make it any color you want. I could take this and move it, into the little bit more blue spectrum or something. But for right now, I'm just gonna leave it alone, because once you get set up like this, if you're doing a still frame render, you're gonna want to leave the camera alone and just sort of do your renders, so you don't, compositing can be, sort of a nightmare if you move this thing around and, output images and expect them to composite. So always leave that static for compositing if you're doing a still image. Now, it may be different if you want to attach, say, maybe a turntable to this. And that would be really easy to do in order to animate this scene a little bit. So let's look at 2 things. Let's come in here first and look at the option of taking this with its on this surface shader and messing around with this out transparency, because in the beginning, like, let's say we want this to start out as a wireframe and we just want to see the wireframe. All right, you could go to your transparency level here and bring it all the way up, and that'll make it transparent. Make sure you're in your keyframe number 1, and let's just right mouse click on the out transparency and then set a key. And let's bring that forward about maybe 130 frames or something like that. And let's set another key. We'll go right mouse and set key, and we'll leave it, at white, and that says, oh, let's stay fully transparent up until this point. So I'll move it forward a few more frames. Well, let's go to about 175, and then let's bring this transparency level all the way down. So I'll just bring that fully on like that, right mouse click, and then set a key. Okay, so now when I go back to the beginning, I should get a really cool, should be a wireframe to begin with, and then it fades into its solid form. All right, so that would be the difference of, let's say this render right here, going from there, back into something that looks more like that. All right, so that would sort of be the, but it would fade in. So you get the idea. Really cool. All right, so let's go on to the next step. Let's say we want to output this, just as a, without any ambient occlusion or anything like that, because that's what we were working with in the last tutorial. I may want to just create a surface, especially for this, and you might want to go over into your hypershade and just create like just a regular Lambert, a new Lambert. This one will be Lambert 5, okay? And let's take Lambert 5 and maybe make it some color that we can distinguish a little better. We'll just make it like an off blue. And we're going to assign that Lambert 5 to this right here. I'm going to go ahead and assign existing material Lambert 5. And, if I take a render, of course, it's going to look, it's going to look like what it does. But what we want to make sure that we have is we want to make sure that this shading group is activated to contour rendering. So I'm going to come back over into the hypershade, and I think I'll just clear this graph, and we'll look at this Lambert 5 right here. And let's see, let's just graph that network. See what we got. Actually, let's show the input-output connections as well. Right now it's just, your basic Lambert group. And this is what we're interested in this node right here. So I'll just hit Lambert group, and we'll go, there it is in our tabs. And we want to enable the contour rendering. And we'll go ahead and just leave this width at like 1250 by default. So now we just have a standard Lambert 5. That's our default. I'm going to go ahead and do a render, and hopefully this doesn't take forever. Yeah, it will take forever. I'm thinking that we should get white lines on here, but I can't be for certain because I may have forgotten something. And we'll go over that in a second and take a look, because this might happen to you as you, start creating stuff and assigning stuff. Well, okay, I did get my lines, and I do see the blue under there. So anyway, that's what should happen. Now, if it doesn't happen, just go back and kind of repeat the steps of how to adjust this stuff. But in this case, right now, I'm going to take these white lines, and we're going to make them a little less, obtrusive, and maybe take that down to 0.300 or something like that. I'll do another quick render, and in this case, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we'll do another quick render, and we'll be done with this for a moment. We're going to create a turntable for this object next, because now it has, just a little bit of color. It'll have some some wireframes if we need. And then we'll put this on a turntable so that, we'll see the full effect. Okay, so that looks a lot better. I'm going to go ahead and save that one. And let's look at the difference between, where we were and here's where we're at now. Got that, and that looks a lot better. Okay, so let's assign a turntable to this object. If you just go ahead and select that, make sure you're in your animation menu set and come over to animate, come down to your turntable, and you can go ahead and click on your option box. We have a number of frames. I think I'll set this frame to like 400 to match the animation, down here in how many frames I got set. And yeah, we'll go clockwise. Okay, So I'm just going to do turntable. Now you can see where it says turntable camera 1 down here. And if I go ahead and hit play, you know, basically it's set up and it's ready to roll. It's just being a turntable around my objects. So there you go. Okay, well now this, you know, is basically an image sequence. As you see there, it's actually a looping image sequence. So, you know, essentially you could output this and just loop it for, you know, anything that you want to do. And that's really cool. Okay, so let's say we have all that. Then, you know, in order to output this, let's look at what it was like here. You know, you may want to think about how to output this now, because we could do one of two things. We could sort of play around with the transparency level of the, you know, the lines here, or we could just sort of drop out the material and just render out these lines. Now, I'm thinking that I just want to render out the, I basically just want to render out my wireframe, my white wireframe here. So you kind of have to think about, well, how would you do that? Well, we're going to have to get rid of the color, and we're going to have to change a couple of things up here. So we want to make that black. I'm going to choose my Lambert 5 right here and just sort of make its color completely black. And then I think then it would just basically output as, let's do a quick render there. It'll output as a wireframe, but you'll also be able to see through there because the black areas are transparent. So I guess that's a cool thing. And there it is. So, you know, if you want to maybe composite this into a scene, I would probably take this plane and just turn off its primary visibility. And by doing that, if I click this plane and then go over to its primary visibility, let's see what got here. You get plane. I want to come over into mental ray. Actually, we want to be over here in mental ray. No, we don't. We want to be over here. No, we don't. And we want to be over here. Mental ray. Well, anyway, we want to turn off this plane's primary visibility. Got no idea why I can find it. Let's see, display. We could turn off its visibility there, and then we could do a render and, you know, basically, yeah, just turn off primary visibility. That's really what you want to do. Okay. So there you go. Now let's look at the quick way to composite this into After Effects or Photoshop and just sort of look at the process there. I'm going to go ahead and bring this render view back over. There was my, you know, there's basically my wireframe, my white wireframe. I'll go ahead and save this image in the view here. But the whole process of doing this is sort of like going, you know, when you get your wireframes the way you want or whatever, come down to File and save your image. In this case, I'll just call this, you know, like Helix white wireframe or something. All right, and we'll go with that. I'll save it to the desktop. Got to my desktop. And instead of the alias pics, I think what I'll do is just assign this a normal Maya IFF, because Photoshop and After Effects and Maya IFF get along really well together. Okay, so I'm just going to save that. And it's going to save out as a 1280 by 720. So that's the actual size of, you know, project that I'm working with in both Photoshop and After Effects. So I'm going to get rid of that render view for a second. We'll minimize Maya there, and let's come into, say, Photoshop first. Now you'll notice that I already have a composite going here, and I'll just bring in my white lines because I don't have any white lines in here yet. So we're going to bring those white lines in. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to File. I want to open, oh actually I want to activate Photoshop. We'll go to File, we'll go to Open. And in this case, I believe that that went to my desktop, and it's Helix white lines. There it is, Helix white contour, here, Helix white frame. believe that's it. Okay, and I'll hit open. Let me bust this one off of here for a second, and what I'll do is I'll just grab the layer here and just sort of drop it on top here and say okay, yes, and then since I have snapping on, this will snap into place. Alright, so I just placed it in there. Now there's one thing you have to do as you start this process, and this goes true for After Effects or for Photoshop here. This layer number 8, we need to switch that over, or any of your wireframe layers, switch them over to a screen, and by doing so you'll now have those as a compositing element. Very cool. Okay, so we'll do the same for After Effects, and I think what I'll do is just sort of hide Photoshop for a second, and let's go back down into After Effects, and we'll do the same thing. We'll bring those white lines into here. So I'll just maybe go to like File, Import, and let's see, it was on my desktop. It was Helix something or other. Helix frame, Helix white frame, and there it is. And I think I'll just go with ignore for the moment, and there it is. So I could place this into basically into the scene. I'll just see if I can drop it in here somewhere and actually move it up to the top. Alright, so there it is. I mean, basically it was as simple as that. It's the same size as my other compositing images, so no big deal there. Now, there is a couple of things you want to do and be aware of here, is that you can right mouse click once it's active in the layer there. Just right mouse click, come to your blending mode, and then go ahead and switch that over to a screen. And it should do something like that. Okay? So there you go. And yeah, you can see where the other colors are kind of coming through, because there is some transparency in there. You want to kind of be aware of which lines you're dealing with, because if you add in one of these other colors over the top, it could have an effect on the coloration. So anyway, just something to be aware of. And let's see, that's it. Let's see, let's turn on those white lines on top, turn off everything else, and that's some basic compositing. Now obviously if you're going to be doing a 400 frame sequence, you want to render this out kind of correctly. I'm going to go to hide After Effects here. We'll go back into Maya. Inside of Maya here, let's look at the render settings for a second. You're going to be rendering all of this stuff out, so make sure that you're in Mental Ray, and that you have your quality set the way you want. Make sure your features are there. And here's an interesting thing, is that this around silhouettes, sometimes you might want to have that checked. I'm going to bring this over, because I'll go back to one of these other images. And we'll go around there. When you have a round silhouette or the coverage, if I were to have that checked, you'd sort of see a default line going along, the very outer edge of your geometry, and it would sort of, keep everything kind of contained in there. But sometimes you may or may not want that. So play around with it. Make sure you sort of look at what a render looks like with a round silhouette, or, whatever. And then you obviously have some other choices there, but that's about it. Okay, so there you go. Make sure that when you're in your comments section, that you go ahead and give your thing a name, like this is Helix Turntable. All right, Helix Turntable. Okay, got it. I'm going to do IFF. I'm going to do like a name number and extension. That lets me set this up down here. We'll go start frame 1. And end frame is at 400. Alright, so now that we got that, our renderable camera, in this case you may want to really look at add renderable camera, because it's going to add that turntable. Not only is it going to render what's in your perspective here, but it's also going to render the turntable. But you have to be aware of the fact that you always have to enable you know, like your turntable camera like that. So keep that in mind. And if you didn't want to, you know, render the perspective, you could just, you know, get rid of that. And renderable camera, we could get rid of the front. So just make sure that you have renderable camera, turntable 1 on. I'm going to output mine at the HD of 1280 720. All right, and there you go. And make sure that you always check your features section to make sure that these don't get disabled along the way when you're doing some rendering, okay? Because sometimes when you switch your presets right here, that can get thrown off. It can basically deactivate these two. Okay, so there you go. I hope you learned something, and yeah, we got through it, but I'll tell you what, it'll make for some really good looking wireframe, you know, kind of modeling show off. Look at me, look at my models. You know, so have fun with it. Be a good person, read a book, and thanks for watching. All right, so have a good weekend.